Hey everyone, here is how I made the Children's Corner pattern Virginia. Now overall it's a very easy pattern and I think it's quite adorable. I've chosen some velvet and velveteen to make this example out of, which gives it this sort of fall wintry look, but it could be easily made out of some cotton batiste or lawn or, for like a spring summery look instead. And as always, I will have all of my materials that I've used in this description box below, as well as timestamps and lots of other goodies. So if you have a question, check in the description box first, please. Okay, so to get started, you'll cut out 2 sleeves, and I like to make little notches on my sleeves at the front, back, and top, as well as the bottom of the sleeves where the gathers will start and stop. Then I cut out 2 fronts on the fold as well as 2 backs on the fold. Now I put this together a little bit differently than the pattern, so when I cut out the backs on the fold, I line up the fold line to where the pattern marks the lap, if that makes sense. So I'm just ignoring that facing part. Then there's the skirt front and back sections all folded up, and these are pretty simple to cut out. They're just rectangles, and if you get lucky, you'll be able to clip and then rip your fabric at the measurements you need. So you won't actually have to use a straight edge or anything. So finally I cut out my contrasting fabric, and can I just say how much I love this color. Oh, it's so perfect for fall and winter looks. So you'll cut out 4 sleeve bands and 4 of the collars, and since I love this color so much and I wanted some more of it on the dress, I cut out some pieces to use for ties in the back of the dress, but obviously, this is completely optional. I just wanted, like I said, more of that color on this dress. Oh yeah, and you'll want to rip a strip of your dress fabric for the placket. I just do a 2-inch wide, and I do plenty long, like 10 inches or so is usually more than enough length. Okay, so now on to the sewing. First, I took the front and back pieces and joined them together at the shoulder seams. And when that's done, I ironed these seams open, and at this point, the front and back pieces were all joined at the seams in an alternating assembly. So the front pieces will be across from each other, and the same goes for the back pieces. And then I folded the back pieces onto themselves at the center back and brought the front piece to the other front piece, and you can see kind of how the bodice is now becoming lined, or at the beginning stages of being lined, if you will. And then from there, I gave everything an ironing and moved on to the collar pieces. You'll join the collar piece at the right sides together using a 1/4-inch seam allowances, or as close as you can get to a 1/4-inch seam allowance. And I moved my needle over so the distance between my needle and the edge of my pressure foot was a 1/4 inch, and that made, the eyeballing a bit easier. Just take your time going around curves. If your machine has a needle down setting, that's helpful to turn on so you can kind of easily pivot around those curves. And then I clipped the corner areas and trimmed up the seam allowance. And after I turned the collar right sides out, I pushed all the curves out and gave it a really good ironing. From there, I opened up the bodice from its lining, and I lined up the collar so it was at the center of the front of the bodice. So make sure to smush your collar pieces, I know it's a technical term, smush your collar pieces together, because you definitely don't want a gap between the collar pieces. Now sometimes I actually run a little tack stitch joining the collars together at the front. I skipped it here, don't ask me why, but you are more than welcome to do that if you find it helpful. I do that half the time, and half the time I just skip it and pin it instead. Kind of depends on my mood. But at any rate, after the collars are sewn in place, then I flip the lining section of the bodice right sides to the bodice and collar pieces. After making sure that everything was lined up, then I sewed from one center back all the way to the other center back, and I clipped the curves around the neckline. And finally, I moved the entire seam to the left, if you will. Basically, I'm preparing to understitch, so whatever side you move your seam to, that will be your lining side. I hope that makes sense. Then I just understitch all the way around, and you can see how I gently apply some pressure just to make sure the fabric isn't bunching up as I'm stitching around. And this understitching just helps the collar lay better. And so while it's optional, I do recommend it. And on to the sleeves now. I put 2 rows of gathered stitches on top of the sleeves between the front and back clips, as well as 2 rows of gathered stitches on the bottom of the sleeves, again between the clip marks. Now the idea of having 2 rows of gathered stitches is you'll have 1 row on either side of where your permanent stitches will go later on, and the 2 rows help the gathers line stay in line, if you will, as you sew. Just keeps things nice and tidy. So moving on to the sleeve bands, sew these right sides together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And once you press all of the seams open, then you can put 2 of the sleeve bands together, right sides together, and sew around the curved edge. And I used pins to keep everything lined up as I sewed. And again, just take this slow, putting your needle down and pivoting as needed. Finally, you can clip the corner areas and trim up the seam allowance. I joined the sleeve together using French seams, and I have a detailed video on how to do French seams that I will link below. So now on to matching up the sleeve band to the bottom of the sleeve. I started with matching up the sleeve seams, and then I went about halfway across, if you will, and I pinned that in place, and then I just sort of adjusted the gathers from there. And I stitch all the way around the bottom of the sleeve, joining the sleeve to the sleeve band. And it's a little bit tricky since this area is small, but just do an inch or so at a time and a little turn, an inch or so at a time and turn, and you will eventually be done. It is a little bit cumbersome, but it's not that long. So after trimming up the seam allowance, I turned the sleeve band right sides out and then continued to turn the lining for that sleeve band up towards the inside of the sleeve band. The bottom corner inch of the lining of the sleeve band will get turned under, and then I'll hand stitch that down later using the machine stitches at that sleeve band, sleeve seam, if you will, to secure my hand stitches onto. Then I took my back skirt piece and folded it in half widthwise so I could easily find the center back. And I gave this an ironing so there would be a crease that I could cut down. I could just follow that crease to form the placket using the continuous placket method, and I have a detailed video on how to do this placket that I will link below. Then I run 2 rows of gathered stitches in the top of the back of the skirt as well as the top of the front of the skirt, and from there I gather each side of the back of the skirt to fit the back of the bodice. Now with the placket, since the right side is supposed to lay on top of the left side in girls' garments, you'll match up the folded edge of the placket on the left side with the folded edge of the bodice back. And you will sew that together, and I like to leave the lining at the back of the bodice away from these stitches since I like to sew this by hand later on. I just think it's a bit of a cleaner look to do it by hand. Meanwhile, on the right side of the placket, you'll actually fold that edge over since it's going to be on top of the left side when the dress is worn. I hope all of this is making sense. So you can go ahead and sew the skirt front to the bodice front in the same manner, leaving that lining separate from your stitches. So at this point we've got the skirt together to the bodice sections, and then I took the bottom of those lining sections and turned them under and ironed that in place. And again, I will sew these by hand later on. So for now, I just make sure those edges, those folded edges, stay folded as I take my dress to my machine and sew down the side seams using French seams. Oh, and I sandwich my dress ties, if you're wondering, in the second part of the French seam. I forgot to videotape this, but again, these are completely optional. If you want to do them, just put them in the second part of that French seam. It's not a big deal at all. It's easy peasy. Finally, take that sleeve and match up the side seams with right sides together. Then I match the top of the sleeve to the shoulder seam of the dress. And then I just sort of adjust the gathers as necessary to make the sleeves fit. And carefully stitch around that sleeve. I know it's a little bit cumbersome, but just do a little bit of time, turn a little bit of time, you get the drill. You'll be done with it before you know it. And then I trimmed up the sleeve and went back over it with a zigzag to tidy up those raw edges. So here is my completed dress after I completed the hand sewing and added some snap buttons to the back of the dress. And I just think the pattern is quite adorable. It's like a little, kind of not schoolgirlish, but it's just cute and classic, and I don't know. It's adorable. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them. As always, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time.